globalization in China, we can look at it from 3 different perspectives. So today's forum has been split into 3 different topics. The first, we will look at economic globalization as a whole, followed by the process of globalization in China, and lastly, we'll explore what are some of the global opportunities that China's development has brought to the world. So for each topic, we have speakers from 3 different groups to present their findings, and followed by question and answer session.
Okay, and in order to enroll more students to take part in our discussion, we offer a Weibo interactive platform there. You can send short messages to 1069-009-009-12428 or log in Weibo application or web directly to share your comments. The guide of Weibo interactive platform has shown on the screen. Last but not least, the participants, please be reminded to keep the time within 15 minutes. A marker will show you the remaining time when there are 3 minutes left and 1 minute left. Please summarize and round out once the 3-minute sign is shown. Okay, and let's come to our topic 1, economic globalization. And first, let's invite Tan Qihong, the first speech. Thank you.
Hello everyone. It's a privilege to be the first speaker of today. What I want to talk about today is globalization and just some general understanding of it. It's very unusual for me to dress like this, and I hope to do a good warming up job for the following speakers. So let's get into our topic. During the speech, I'm going to ask you 4 questions. And the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is globalization? What is it? Just forget about all the things you learned from textbooks and tell me what flashed immediately through your mind right now. Well, you guys have been keeping in touch with this idea for the whole semester, so I believe you are quite familiar with this definition. Globalization is all about movement, you may say, particularly movement across the border in a list of ways. Goods, services, capital, information, people that flow across distances, so on and so on. Globalization is kind of power to cross the borders between countries without respecting them. It's a process which makes people from different countries more interconnected and more interdependent. With more international barriers reduced, these connections span much greater in distance and shorter in time. As a result, the world we live in is compressed smaller and smaller. According to the Dictionary of Human Geography, the word globalization is derived from the term globe village for describing the effects of new communication technologies on social and cultural life. Marshall McLuhan, who was a famous theorist in sociology and media, coined this word to emphasize that human activities are now practiced at a global scale, with a consequent reduction in the significance of other geographical units. Globalization is different from the term internationalization. These two words similarly very like each other, but they are totally different meanings. Globalization, internationalization focuses on the interrelation going on between nations, but globalization suggests that the social, cultural, economic, and political process have moved into a larger scale in which no nation is not the fundamental unit anymore. Since we are econ students and we probably mainly focus on the economic phenomena brought by the globalization, but other aspects of globalization are of the same importance and should not be overlooked. The next question I'm going to ask you is, when did it start? I think it's very helpful to talk about the timing of it. As far as I know, the whole process can be originated thousands of years ago. Our ancestors were all from a single tribe on somewhere of Africa and gradually explored and conquered every corner of our planet and formed into different races and nations and set up empires and civilizations through thousands of years. The entire history of civilization itself is a process of globalization. The interaction between two primitive villages, maybe they were trading goods, services, or technologies, that's globalization, but at a very, very small scale. But it's the same system, same action as the interaction between empires, between countries, or multinational companies. And over the last few decades, due to a couple of scientific technological innovations, we human beings seem to rejoin the single tribe again through more and more connections between more and more people. But in modern context, when we talk about globalization, it is typically considered to start around 15th century with the rise of capitalism and reach the peak at the early 20th, prior to World War I. And then the world had been through a decline, and it was only after World War II the global interaction steadily mounted upwards again. The recent boom of globalization began in the 1970s. Why 1970s? It was not a coincidence. It has a lot of things to do with the policies of neoliberalism. Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher were the leader of the neoliberalism. During the 1970s, the Western world had been through a series of crises, not only economically, for example, the breakdown of gold standard, oil crisis, the stagnation, but also politically, civil rights movement. For example, students, workers, social democrats, they were talking about revolutions all the time, not to mention the threat from the communism. As a reaction, the Western world abandoned the whole Keynesian stuff and began to emphasize free market, privatization, financialization, and try to impose the Western rules upon every corner of our planet. Some people would argue that globalization is a scenario directed by the neoliberalism to regain the Western power and redistribute the wealth back to the white elite parties again. And the term globalization was created merely to justify the dispossession practiced by the Western world. It sounds more like a conspiracy theory, but truly it was a new round of distribution. Some countries have done well, but others have not. It's an uneven process, and we are far from the end of it. Next question. It comes up with the third question. As what I said, globalization has been there for quite a long time and will continue to proceed. So what's new, you may ask, or what are the new trends? Well, there are numerous changes brought by the globalization. We cannot name every one of it, but there are the following are the couple of things happening right now that our group members think that they're worth to be noticed. First, the change in the human capital, more interaction of human capital and more sharing of education resources. These are some examples. For example, massive open online courses, or MOOC in short, is very popular during these days. MOOC gives students over the world access to the best courses in the world. As long as you have a computer connected to the internet, you are able to attend a class given by the professor of world-famous universities. And some of you may heard the news that Duke University, Wuhan University, and the government of Kunshan will jointly fund a university called Kunshan Duke University. These kinds of universities emerge all over China, such as University of Nottingham, Ningbo, and Kunshan universities. It's a new phenomenon for the globalization of human capital, which means the more interaction of the educational resources on a global scale, which promotes education in developing countries. It will maximize the allocation of the educational resources in the globe. And the second trend we want to mention is an global market has been formed through the increasingly growing electronic commerce. As you may notice, Alibaba's Double 11 yearly promotion activity since 2009 reached 57.1 billion RMB of sale in 11th November 2014. This year, Ali Double 11 is different, not only because the exciting numbers of selling, but also because of its becoming more international. We didn't just buy domestic goods, but this year on Tmall International, we can buy foreign goods more directly. It's another phenomenon. International electronic commerce. It's growing rapidly nowadays. E-commerce grows the economic globalization by offering a platform for companies to enter a global market. It greatly reduces high fees and other restrictions. At the same time, global competition will realize resource allocation at a much larger scale. But not all the things brought by the globalization are all that fascinating. We can see uneven distribution of wealth, the uneven distribution between the developed countries and the developing countries, and the uneven distribution within the developing countries. They are also the trend of the future globalization. These problems need to be solved facing the international communities. So here I'm down with the third question. And the last question, what's your voice? No doubt, globalization is a controversial issue. There are pros and antis. Some people believe it's the only moral value, and only in this way can the world become a better place. Other people are against this idea of globalization. Like what I said, they believe it's just a scenario practiced by Western countries. It's neo-colonialism. This kind of view is especially held by the hundreds of millions of bottom people who've gained little benefit from the current system. Well, there is no win in the debate. But whether elected or not, the presence of globalization is everywhere and will continue to stay. Some people say now we're in the age of globalization 3.0, where not only countries, big companies, but also individuals can play important roles in the playfield. It's kind of gets everybody involved. Globalization is the playfield of our generation. It's irresistible. We cannot resist it, but we can have our own voice. So what's your voice? Or in other words, where's your stance? How you want to participate how you try to change the way world participation depends on where you sit there. As econ students or as a world citizen, it's impossible for us not to think globally in this world. I think one of those purposes of our courses or of our forum is to fully aware what's going on in the globe, to fully understand different views held by different people, and in a word, to be an international guy. Hope you'll talk with me at the break, and thank you for listening. That's my speech. Thank you.
The second speaker, Sergey from Kazakhstan and Natalia from Russia.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Natalia, and this is Sergey. Today, our group is going to present some information on the topic of economic globalization and its impact on international economy. Our presentation is consisted of two main parts. The first one is basic knowledge on economic globalization, and the second one is some delusions about it. As already been said more about the definition of globalization, I will skip it and move on. According to the International Monetary Fund, there are four basic aspects of globalization. The first one is the trade and transactions. Developing countries increased their share of world trade from 19% to 29% in the period of 1971 to 1999. The second part is capital and investment movements. Private capital flows to developing countries soared during the 1990s, replacing aid or development assistance, which fell significantly after the early 1980s. The third part is migration of and movement of people. In the period between 1965 to 1990, the proportion of labor forces migrated approximately doubled. And the fourth one is dissemination of knowledge and technology. As we know, the impact on our world, the impact of economic globalization on our world is very huge. International trade in manufactured goods increased more than 100 times between 1955 and 2007. By the early part of the 21st century, more than 1.5 trillion in national currencies were traded daily to support the expanded levels of trade and investment. The costs and benefits of globalization have not been equally distributed across regions and nations. Another one is brain drain. Opportunities in rich countries attract talent from poor countries, leading to brain drain. For example, nurses from poorer foreign countries come to the United States to work. This phenomenon cost Africa over 4.1 billion on the employment of 150,000 expatriate professionals annually. Another one is working conditions. In some developing countries, labor policies provide less protection than in developed countries. Another one is business process outsourcing. In rich countries, business process outsourcing has been a double-edged sword. It enabled cheaper services, but displaced some service sectors' jobs. Another one is income inequality. World Bank figures indicate that the number of people living on less than $1 per day dropped from 1.25 billion in 1990s to 986 million in 2004. Another one is consumption. Consumer goods exports such as televisions, radios, bicycles, and textiles into the United States, Europe, and Japan fueled the economic expansion of Asian tiger economies. China exports were worth $157.5 billion in October of 2011. In that year, exports of goods and services constituted 39.7% of China's GDP. Another one is financial independence. The collapse of the subprime mortgage market in the USA led to a global financial crisis and recession on a scale not seen since the Great Depression. And the last one is drug and illicit goods trade. In 2010, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime reported that the global drug trade generated more than 320 billion a year in revenues. And that's all for the basic information, and then Sergey will continue our presentation.
Hello there, people. My name is Sergey. I would like to explain to you something about myths about of economical globalization. Like a lot of people think a lot of different things about it. Like most of it ain't true. Listen. The first myth of economic globalization is that economic globalization is inevitable. Advocates of economic globalization try to describe it as an inevitable process, a logical outgrowth of economic and technological forces that evolved over centuries to their present form, merely as if they were forces of nature like gravity. Economic globalization in the modern era is not some kind of accident of evolution. It directly emerged from a set of institutions and rules created on purpose by human beings for a specific goal, to give primacy to certain economic processes and values and place them above all others. In fact, modern-day globalization had a birth date and a birthplace, Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, July 1944. That's when the world's leading economists, bankers, corporate heads, and the heads of Western governments tried to create a new economic system. Following the devastation of World War II, they decided on the globally centralized system with the global corporations as engines of economic growth. The institutions were created with a new rule and the powers to help grease the pathways for the corporations. Out of the Bretton Woods meeting grew instruments that later became the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, the General Agreement of Tariffs and Trade, North American Free Trade Agreement, and now the World Trade Organization, which is WTO. The primary function of these bodies is to place economic values above all others and to establish rules that suppress the ability of nation-states to sustain laws and protect nature, workers, consumers, and even national sovereignty and democracy, if they can be construed as slowing down free trade. The net result is the greatest transfer of economic and political power from nation-states to corporations ever in history. But none of it is inevitable. All of it can be reversed once citizen movements and the governments realize that full consequences. To call what is essentially a collection of rules very consequential rules inevitable is really designed to make everyone feel there is nothing to be done about it, thus promoting passivity. The second myth is we need globalization to feed the hungry. The globalization of corporate industrial-style agriculture has failed to address the world hunger crisis. In fact, it makes it worse. During the past 2 decades, the total amount of food in the world has increased, but hunger rates have also increased, far faster than even population growth. The main problem is that globalization of food production is actually pushing small, self-reliant farmers, who now account for 40% of global food production off their lands, and replacing them with large chemical and machine-intensive corporate farms. Evicted, landless farmers found themselves without jobs or money to buy food. A 1994 study reported alarming percentage of rural families who now have insufficient land to support themselves and their communities. In Peru, the number of landless land poor was 75%, in Ecuador 75%, 66% in Colombia, 32% in Kenya, and 95% in Egypt, among many others. Even in the US, there is a losing a record number of families, farms every year. The globalized industrial agriculture model does not emphasize food for hungry local communities. Instead, it encourages export economics resulting in monocultures, a single crop grown on thousands of acres, The crops are unusually luxury high-profit items such as flowers, beef, shrimp, cotton, coffee, and soybeans cultivated for export to wealthy countries. In addition, monocultures are notoriously vulnerable to insect blights and bad weather, and greatly contribute to soil infertility. Myth 3: globalization will elevate poverty. Poverty. This has been the theme strongly around since Bretton Woods. Free trade and globalization will lift all boats and end poverty. But in the half century since the Big Push began, the world has more poor and more hungry than ever before. And the situation is getting steadily worse as we approach the millennium. Economic globalization creates wealth, but only for a few elite who can see at the heart of the process, able to benefit from the surge of consolidation, mergers, global scale technology, and financial activity. Recent figures confirm how it all works. Benefits are so concentrated that the number of billionaires in the world has increased by 25% in only the last 2 years. Of the 100 largest economies in the world, 52 are now corporations. Mitsubishi is the 22nd largest economy in the world. General Motors is the 26th. Ford is 31st. All the larger than the national economies of Denmark, Thailand, Turkey, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Norway, Finland, Chile, etc. Some people point to the booming stock market and record low unemployment as evidence that economic globalization is working. But while the stock market has boomed, it actually does not reflect the reality of life for most people. Almost 90% of the value of all stocks in mutual households is owned by the richest 10%. So much for the rising tide that lifts all boats. Actually, it lifts only yachts. Fourth myth is economic globalization increases choice. Also untrue. The ultimate expression of choice is diversity, and economic globalization destroys both cultural and biological diversity. Globalization is homogenizing values and behaviors, producing a new global monoculture, just as it creates monocultures in agriculture. While economic globalization may increase consumer choice in some cases, it drastically diminished our choice in almost every sphere of life. Also domination of major industries by a handful of multinational corporations makes it next to impossible for small local producers to compete. When brands like Coca-Cola and Levi's proliferate around the globe, they put local operators out of business, which limits consumer choice. The fifth myth, economic globalization increases environmental standards in developing countries by making countries wealthier. First of all, economic globalization does not produce wealth, save for a small percentage of people. The wealth that is produced is rarely spent on environmental programs. Multilateral lending agencies set up further the agenda of economic globalization, such as an International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, practically ensure environmental destruction. The conditions attached to loan from the IMF and World Bank require the governments open up their natural resources to corporate exploitation and cut spending for environmental programs. In any case, some kind of environmental destruction can be reversed through increases expeditions. No amount of money can bring back species pushed to extinction. The sixth myth. Opposition to economic globalization is protectionist. Advocates of economic globalization have succeeded in making the term protectionism a dirty word. They use it to offhandedly dismiss everyone from environmentalists to consumers, to small business people, to organized labor. Peasant farmers are lampooned and protectionist for resisting trade liberalization and for trying to preserve a so-called inefficient way of life that has been served them to their communities well for centuries. Next one. Developing countries are dependent on economic globalization to achieve first world standard of living. Developing countries are in fact becoming poorer, not richer. They're already paying the highest price for globalization. This is because the rules of the global bureaucracies invariably favor non-incorporated interests. While it is widely accepted that the biosphere is incapable of sustaining 6 billion people at the consumption levels of the North, one cannot argue that poor countries should stay poor while rich countries continue to consume more than they share. The overconsumption of the North has been fueled by centuries of exploitation of the self-natural resources, so we must give a much higher priority to cutting overconsumption, sharing resources and wealth, and recognizing the self-legitimate needs for sustained development. The last one, the 8th.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, your time's up. Okay.
That's the last one. Thanks.
Hello, thank you for Sergei's and Natalia's perfect performance. And for speakers, if you feel the microphones influence your performance, you can adjust its height. Okay, let's welcome our next speakers, also the last speaker of this topic 1, and Dimash from Pakistan.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Excuse me that I stopped there. Okay, starts up from the defining of the section of the economic globalization. We can know a lot of what people say previously, but like everybody knows the definition of the globalization is breaking the all walls which is around any state. All states can't, already said that they can't develop it isolated, and because of that, they have to break some walls. And globalization gives them the opportunity to any country to produce something or make the export and imports for the free. And for that, the globalization makes like this. But sorry. Okay. Let's talk about the treaties which is made by globalization. The last 20-30 years, globalization gives all of the world, many countries incoming to the increasing of all incoming, and it was like a boom for all countries. And you know that these treaties, which was making a trade of the World Trade Organization, it was making some rules for any countries to trade, like no taxes for the involving to the organizations. Like this. Okay, effect of the tariffs. We know that we can see how this vertical our prices and the quantity. The prices quantity is a little bit opposite to each other, and we know the supply and demand depends on this of globalization. So we can see that as more with the society's laws and the tax and the society's laws, they are the same, but moving the higher to the quantity is coming to down. Also, we can talk about some advantages which was globalization gives the countries. Every country has their own free trading. Free trading gives every country to impact on the cultures, and it is even has some attraction for not only an economical way, also the cultures, because we know that the roads which was breaking between these states, it gives some cultural involving for any country. And because of that, we can say that it's not only in an economical way, also the culture or all the international relations. Wait. Something wrong with that. No. Okay, fair trade. Also the fair trade. We can see that $1.6 billion was made after the similar country could have after the globalization, and it gives a real good impact for any country. But in fact, the fair trade, it's like said before, it's some kind of myth, and people who is really believing it that they can protect themselves by some numbers, also like this $1.6 billion. But in fact, it looks like a fair trade, it's a good myth. How I can want to prove it? Okay, I'm gonna do it like this. Business investment and corporate profits after the tax. You see that the blue one and the red one. The blue one goes higher because there is no taxes. That's the time of the using the globalization and the stage which doesn't have the globalization. We see that the main point of not giving the good impact it gives because of the taxes. And globalization take all these taxes and gives them to like increase their impact and incoming. We can see this from the blue one. Voices of the developing countries. One of the disadvantages of the globalization it's like a discrimination of the little countries. For example, we know that some countries who are economically already higher than others, they have some more opportunity. For example, the US, China, Russia, etc. But the problems of the, for example, Caribbean or Latin American countries, these states doesn't have any economical basis like this. And because of that, they, for example, all their trading depends on the countries which are more stronger than them. And because of that, they also is isolated by the organization. You can see some numbers from the 1980 until the 2012 years, how was it changing? From the 3.4 until the 5.0 million percent. Growth rate of the real per capita GDP. You can see the yellow one, red one, blue one, non-globalized, and which countries. From this one, we can see that according to this one, we can see that from the 16th until the 90s of years, the globalizers, which was increasing the more, and this is the red one, which was increasing until during the 40 years, 30 years. Multinational corporations. Before the globalization, all of the world, the international actors was only the states or countries or some governments. But in fact, after the globalization, any multiple corporations they have some opportunity to play on the international relations area. Because of that, we can see that some Coca-Cola, etc., all these corporations they have some of their own politics in the world. You can see that, like most of countries which is only in a green one, which was already involved into the globalization, it's like year per year, it depends, and here is more and more countries which is involved into the globalization. Patrick, thank you for attention.
Thank you, Dina. Okay, so now we open the floor to a session of discussion. So if you guys have any questions, you can raise your hand, and the question will be open to anyone on the floor who has just presented. This question will be about the first topic, which is economic globalization. So if you have any questions, you can just raise your hand and someone will pass the microphone to you. There's
Alright, it's really a great pleasure to attend this kind of forum, and I think this is a great opportunity to all of us to improve our understanding with the work and among ourselves. Actually, I have addressing to each speaker. For the first speaker, Chin, I really mentioned the difference between internationalization and globalization. And he mentioned that for internationalization, nation is a basic unit. But for globalization, it is a more grander picture, including political, social, economic structure. Then my question is, in globalization, besides nation, what's the other basic unit? Do you have a question? Do you have an answer for this short question?
我要怎么回答？ I'm not very clear of your question.
Okay. The definition of internationalization and globalization are different. internationalization mainly describes the interrelationship between different nations, where globalization describes the grander of the more general picture. So then the question is, besides nation, what's the other basic unit of globalization? Yes, we know nation is the basic
Nation
unit.
is basic unit, and I think all kind of institutions which play the role in the international economy is sort of fundamental unit. So I mean it's just a little distinctions between the two terms. The internationalization is more keep its focus on the relation between the countries. That I want to express.
That's in the same direction with my intent answer. My answer is I can see multinational corporations. I believe multinational corporations, they have cross-border organization and they forming the other basic unit of globalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your
Thank you for the discussion. Would anyone else like to ask a question? Okay, since there's no one that wants to ask a question, we'll just move on to the next topic. So the next topic is actually the process of globalization in China itself. Yeah, the process of globalization in China. So let us first welcome our first speaker for this topic.